welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our session. So I'm here today with my colleague Sonia Petrescu, and we will talk to you about the security services of SAP BTP and about the identity lifecycle services. So yeah, we'll dive right in. Lots to say in a short period of time, so we'll just get started. First of all, the security infrastructure and all of our security endeavors within BTP are built on three pillars. So building securely, running securely, and acting securely. All of this rests on a foundation of a zero trust architecture, which basically means that we trust no one unless they have proven that they actually are who they claim to be. So whether you're within the network or outside of the network, first of all, you have to prove your identity. The principle of shared fate or shared responsibility, which means that SAP has certain responsibilities, as do our customers. We'll get to that in more detail later. And of course, we are also being informed and guided by standards and frameworks such as NIST and ISO. Building securely, I think that's probably the most important part is that security for SAP software is integrated right from the start. So it's not an afterthought, it's something that's integrated into the development process right when we start to plan it. There is extensive training for developers, there is a security standard and guidelines that they have to follow in order to be able to ship the software. So it's an integral part of our development and also of the operations lifecycle at SAP. We have numerous security solutions and features, some of which, such as the identity services that Sonia will introduce in detail later on. Our cloud environments themselves are, of course, secure, whether it's the SAP multi-cloud environment or Microsoft Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Platform. All of these, of course, have their security measures in place. Running securely, a large part of that is the controls that we have. So we have over 2,300, I think, preventative and detective controls in place. And each year there are well over 100 audits to make sure that these controls are effectively implemented. Transparency in this case means that you can actually check all this. So you can log on to the SAP Trust Center. There is a link on our last slide. If you want to check this out, you can see everything is documented, and yeah, that's a big part of our strategy, is being very transparent on everything we do. We also have a global cyber fusion center, which orchestrates our response to threats and vulnerabilities, incident and response management, and all that is consolidated in that cyber fusion center. Acting securely, SAP employees, you, our customers and partners, we all have to work together. We're in this together when it comes to cloud security. We'll talk a lot more about this when we come to the shared responsibility map later on. But our employees have extensive security training. Customers can give us feedback, can report incidents, can put in development requests on the customer influence platform. And partners, of course, are important in our network to collaborate with us on our security efforts, and also to provide specialized solutions in some cases. And let's move right on to building secure software. Secure user access and permissions. I'm sure you would all agree that is a very large part of having secure cloud applications. And as I mentioned, we'll hear more about that in detail later on. So I won't go into any more detail here. Secure connectivity, of course, regardless of the origin or destination of a connection, it has to be secure from end to end. So all user access is protected by Transport Layer Security, TLS, and for connectivity, we have the BTP Connectivity Service and the Cloud Connector, so that BTP or that the applications can access remote resources, whether they are on the internet or in on-premise systems, securely. That can be highly configured and customized to your needs. These access protocols and just to make sure that you can actually configure the extent to which things can be seen and accessed. Security audit logs. The BTP audit logs are a special kind of log with security relevant data. So this is just, these are logs that are written on your behalf for things like data protection relevant activities, for example. Read access logging for access to sensitive data, or just in general events that are important for security. So just log in, log out attempts. If someone makes any changes to critical configuration settings, all this can be logged and can be audited later on. Secure communication and encryption, I think that sort of stands for itself. And of course, all the communication data in transit is encrypted with TLS. And data at rest is also encrypted. And for that, we just use the encryption infrastructure of the persistent services, so like AWS, Azure, Google. So these are the 4 focus areas for building secure software. Running software securely is in large part governed by the TOMS, Technical and Organizational Measures. You might have heard that before. They basically outline what you can do or cannot do in terms of protecting sensitive data. So to comply with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Guidelines, you have to fulfill these TOMs, and you can see here that they range from things like physical access control to authentication and authorization. More details about TOMs are also available on the SAP Trust Center. So again, check out the link and search for TOMs, and you will find lots of detailed information about those. I mentioned in the beginning that transparency is a big part of our strategy. So all the certifications that we have, you can find them in the Trust Center. I put the detailed link actually on this slide if you want to access those. And you can see we have a lot of certifications. That's also due to the fact that SAP covers tons of markets. So we have some that are regional, some that are like CRITIS, for example, that's the critical infrastructure in Germany. We have market-specific regulations such as PCI DSS, which is the credit card payment security standard. And then we also have things like SOC 2 for operations and compliance. And we have best practices for quality, for example, ISO 9000. All of these are regularly audited, so depending on the specific guideline, it can be like SOC 2, I think that's audited twice a year, and some of the ISO standards are audited once every 36 months, so it really depends. But at any given time, really, there are lots of audits going on at SAP, and you can check all of them and all the details on the Trust Center. Acting securely, like I said in the beginning, that shared responsibility model, that is quite important for running cloud applications. SAP has certain responsibilities, but also customers have certain responsibilities. Now, operations, that's of course, up to SAP because, we are the provider. So things like operating system maintenance, database and storage management, but also providing you with the global account that you need, and of course the resources that you paid for. So you paid for certain services, and of course we're responsible for providing them for you. Also the physical fabric, the base layer that is underlying all of the cloud services, that is either up to us, or if you're working with a hyperscaler, it can also, some parts can also be up to that hyperscaler. But what is the customer's responsibility? So we provide you a global account, but how you divide this up into sub-accounts and who gets which kind of access, how the resources are distributed, that is up to you as a customer, because we can't really make those decisions for you. And specifically, of course, if you develop your own applications on BTP, that management of your own applications is also up to you. If these are applications that SAP develops and provides, of course, that is up to us. But this shared responsibility model is, of course, a very important part of running secure applications in the cloud. And with that,
we will zoom into identity and access management.
Yes.
So before we start with that, let's first remember what are the third main domains of identity and access management. So the first one would be identity lifecycle, because we need a user to be provisioned in all the target applications, and we need to take care of the user lifecycle from the moment that they start into a company till the end of their journey. And this has to also take into consideration aspects like maybe a promotion, maybe a change somewhere in one of the attributes. This has to always be taken care of and always be provisioned in all the target applications. Then we also have to think about authorization, because it's not enough to have a user, we also have to have authorizations for this user, the right amount of authorization that they need to provision, to perform their work in the target systems where they have to do this. Then the third pillar would be authentication, because it's not enough to have a user with the right authorizations. We have to make sure that those users who log into our systems are really the genuinely users that are supposed to log in and not someone else pretending to be those users. So that being said, now let's see what are our products in our portfolio. We differentiate between customer users and enterprise users. So for customer users, we have SAP Customer Data Cloud. And for enterprise users, we have this product portfolio on the right side of the page that we will focus on in the next minutes. So let's start with the lower part, with the on-premise tools. So for identity lifecycle, we have SAP Identity Management. For authorization, we have SAP Access Control. And for authentication, SAP Single Sign-On. Now let's look up to the cloud. And let's start with the Cloud Identity Services. So the Cloud Identity Services, they have inside 4 different services which also cover these 3 domains. We have the identity provisioning, which provisions users, as we will see, between sources and target, more to it soon. Identity Directory Service that actually goes into the components of, goes into all the 3 domains, but let's look at it in the identity lifecycle part for now. Authorization Management Service, which is the newest addition to the Cloud Identity Services family, and Identity Authentication for authentication. In the lower part, we see for authorization SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance, which takes care of governance and compliance topics. More to it soon. And for authentication, we have SAP Secure Login Service for SAP GUI. And now let's zoom in even more into the Cloud Identity Services. So what they are SAP's default for authentication and user provisioning in the SAP Cloud Solutions. And the recommendation is to place them in front of the SAP Cloud infrastructure. And for this, we have the following services to help us have the flows which we need. We have identity authentication for authentication flows. And here we can have delegated authentication, where identity authentication will forward this authentication request to a corporate identity provider. And we have the option where identity authentication authenticates against the user store inside the Cloud Identity Services. Nonetheless, even for the first option, we have the option to add SAP-specific attributes which are stored in the Cloud Identity Services, so therefore enhancing the authentication tokens. We have the provisioning service, which helps us provision users from specific source system to specific target systems, and we do this by using connectors. So the customers don't have to start maintaining or defining point-to-point connections from scratch. We have the connectors, which they can be adapted to customers' needs. We have now a very cool graphical editor. And that being said, IPS can be used as source target or in a proxy mode if it is triggered by a different application, for example, identity access governance or an identity management solution. Authorization Management Service, which is the newest addition to the Cloud Identity Services family, which allows for administrators of the Cloud Identity Services to refine policies which developers have defined in their applications, and to refine them, to combine them, and to give them to users. So these policies, they are created by the developers of the applications, and in the moment when these applications are connected to the Cloud Identity Services, then we will see the policies and we will be able as administrators to assign them. The policies are modeled in the Cloud Identity Services as groups, so they can be simply assigned either from the UI or at API level. Right, and everything is integrated through the directory service. And we have a number of pre-integrated solutions with the Cloud Identity Services because we want to offer the Cloud Identity Services to our customers as a means of easier and safer adopt other SAP Cloud solutions. And for this, we have created together with the colleagues from different LOBs so-called bundles, which are predefined automatic deployed configurations that are giving a working default for our customers. That being said, we have to know that the license is has to be done separate, but this is part of the order fulfillment, and by default we have 2 tenants, the test and the production, but additional ones can be for sure requested and then they can be acquired. Okay, let's continue with the Cloud Identity Access Governance, which also has several solutions inside. So we have the Privileged Access Management to achieve super user access. We have the Access Certification for reviewing access role and risks. We have access requests where we can request for us or for other users authorizations, and then there's a nice workflow which will get started, and we can accept or decline that request depending on various use cases, access analysis, and role design to optimize the role definition. Now, speaking about identity access governance, we have to understand that there are several ways how we can integrate it in our landscape depending on what is the starting point in a project. So we can use a higher HR-driven identity lifecycle setup together with the SuccessFactors source system, and then we have the HR triggers which we can use, or we can use a bridge configuration if we are starting in a landscape from access control on-premise, or the third option with the different identity access management tool than just simply using an API-based integration. All right, so we spoke about Cloud Identity Services. We looked into the SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance, but here we have a reference architecture with the tools and how can they come together, because in isolation they're not really used. However, it's always in the context of an architecture in a project. So as we see here, the Cloud Identity Services, they're positioned in front of the SAP Cloud solutions. So they are acting as a user store, and then the provisioning takes care of dedicated provisioning flow for the target solutions. And in cases where Cloud Identity Access Governance is in the picture, then it works tightly integrated with the Cloud Identity Services for a superior user experience and for having risk analysis and compliance flows inside. This is the part from Cloud Identity Services to the SAP Cloud Solutions. However, in front we have an HR source, a source of identities, which in this case here, in this architecture, is the SAP SuccessFactors, which sends the user to the Cloud Identity Services. But depending on how you're starting the adoption, you might have an identity management solution. So depending on your implementation, you can have identity management integrated with SuccessFactors and together sending the right users with the right email addresses and username into the Cloud Identity Services. So for this purpose, and this is why we recommend this reference architecture, because the second part of the provisioning flows, it's always stable. It's the Cloud Identity Services in front of the SAP Cloud Solutions, which takes care of the provisioning flow. And here again, we have to remember those pre-configured flows, which come really handy to save time. We don't have to create point-to-point connection. And in front, we have the source of users. I hope that now you're curious to learn more about this. So we have packed here for you more links where you can find more information about the services which we have presented. So for the Cloud Identity Services, we have packed here the system integration guide, which points to our official product page. And from here, you can learn more about the reference architectures, and this also will forward you to the different services. And for BTP security, we have, again, the Trust Center, where you can see more about certifications, the BTP security recommendations, and very important, the roadmap, because we have in store more nice new features, which for sure you want to learn about. So make sure to look through these links and, yep.
The shared responsibility model also, so if you're curious about, we get a lot of questions about that, so we put a direct link here. So you can read up on this as well.
So I hope you have questions.
Yes.
Live Q&A.
Okay, so I see a question here. You talked about the shared responsibility model between SAP and customers. Does SAP have best practices to help customers fulfill their part? Yes, we do actually, and that, I don't know if you can still see the slides, but the very last link here, the BTP security recommendations, that would be what you're looking for, and that's specifically a long list of recommendations for all kinds of things that are related to BTP, where you can configure some of these settings and make sure that you actually fulfill the security requirements and that you are acting according to best practices. And we also have a hands-on session on this actually later tonight. So our colleague Jürgen Adolf is going to do a jumpstart session. I believe it's at 8 o'clock CET. You can actually try this out yourself. So you can play around with the system and make the recommended settings. And yeah, you can do this tonight or anytime really within the next, I don't know, months, year, yeah, try that out yourself. So highly recommend that you try this out. And the next question. Actually, there were more questions earlier that sort of vanished. Yeah. I don't know what happened there.
Let's take the next one.
There was a question about success factors, which I think you already answered. So maybe that's why it's gone. There was a question: is can we connect to success factors?
Yes, for sure we can.
Yeah, and I think you
as a source
answered
in
that.
IPS, yes, that we have connectors and also with identity access governance.
Yeah.
And let's take the next one. Can we imagine authorizations with SAP Cloud Identity Services? So the answer is yes, we can. I think here is on the roadmap, we had a functionality called delegated administration for user management, the functionality, and this is a way of using policies inside the Cloud Identity Services for defining and for setting up how administrators in the Cloud Identity Services are, for example, changing different users. So for this, there are these policies which one can configure based on different criteria, for example, attributes like geographic location, and based on geographic location, then users can modify other users in Cloud Identity Services. So this is the way we are consuming the authorization management service internally for the Cloud Identity Services itself. And here we have also a nice feature on the roadmap, delegated administration for applications, which will come also in the next quarters. So, yep.
Okay. So that's all the questions that we see here. So I assume everything else was answered in the chat.
By our colleagues.
Shout out to Jürgen, Pacho, and Carmen, who were helping us out as moderators. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.